Performing live on your hottest blog. Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. I was just working on my review of Zack Snyder's Justice League, hereafter referred to simply as Justice League, since that's its true name. With a microphone in my face, and this camera set up, because, yes, like I always do, this is always how the magic happens. In the spirit of the piece, and because these reviews always wind up resembling their subjects anyway, I decided to just go off, leave the editing to the editing phase. So this review wound up being 10,000 words, or 14 single-spaced pages long. And I figured, rather than not put anything out in January at all, I might as well just chop this thing in half, put the first part out now, and release part 2 at some point close enough to count as Valentine's Day counter-programming. The way I see it, the WB pioneered the practice of chopping films in half all the way back in 2003 with the Matrix sequels. So, I figured, why not channel the parallel universe where something like this probably happened back in 2017 anyway? One of the things the haters like to say is that there's no way a 4-hour Justice League movie would ever be released in theaters, to which I say, there are 7 Harry Potter books and yet somehow 8 movies. In that spirit, maybe I'll mash these two back together into one thing for the March 20th 1-year anniversary of this Justice League's release. Maybe I'll call that review the DeMoss Cut. David DeMoss's And You Thought It Was Safe reviews Justice League 2021. Or something. So, get comfy, grab your snacks, and settle in. Join the Patreon if you'd like to yell at me about this directly, or to try and tell me what to do, though I reserve the right, as always, to ignore you and do whatever I was going to do anyway. For the rest of you, like and subscribe, hope you enjoy, and I'll see you back here at the end of all this. Part 1. No, actually, I'm not doing the Plinkett voice. Part 1. Bruce, I was wrong. You have to listen to me. Back in 2004, I and most of my fellow George Romero fans took one look at Zack Snyder's first film and said, heresy! In the same offended tone that General Zod uses when he finds out that Jor-El and Laura have had a kid the old-fashioned way in Man of Steel. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, but teasing it out would take time, so it's a good thing neither one of us has anywhere better to be, isn't it? Watching Dawn of the Dead again with a friend recently, all of the little character moments stuck out to me, like the nails in a baseball bat you'd use to bludgeon zombies. Like the conversation Andre and Ken have about how impending fatherhood has changed Andre's outlook on life, ironically foreshadowing his eventual horrific death. Or this bit where Glenn decides to mess with CJ and Bart by telling them all about his romantic history while they're his captive audience in their holding cells. Or the way everyone who acts like a self-interested dickhead gets either turned into a zombie or eaten, whereas all the people who act in the interest of their little mall community's greater good either escape or at least get to go out human. And as the intervening 20 years of media have taught us, that last one, in a zombie apocalypse, at least kinda sorta counts as a win. And how this directly contradicts the televangelist's screed, about halfway through, that attributes the film's zombie apocalypse to American right-wing notions of sin. A screed that some bad faith actors have interpreted as the film's actual thesis, despite the evidence presented by the entire rest of the runtime. But since when did that matter? Andre is Mr. Family Values, and his attempt to live up to the patriarchal demands of being both husband and father, with a little trademark symbol after each of those nouns, not only lead to the zombification of his wife and child, but also to the death of Norma, a true hero, savior of Fort Pastor. Rip to a real one, as we'd say now. Pouring one out for a real one, as we'd say back then. Kin the cop goes from being Mr. Fuck Y'all to being the hero cop he probably thought he was before the zombie apocalypse kicked off. Even CJ, king shit of Mall Security Mountain, Mr. America always sorts its shit out, ends up sacrificing himself so everybody else can get to the boat. Well, almost everybody else, but you get the point. This is what's usually called character development, and we're supposed to like it, but 2004 was an awful time. I know it feels like an awful time now, but trust me, kids, it felt like the apocalypse back then, and we weren't even dealing with a plague at the time. Call us sweet summer children if you want. We deserve it. And since nothing we did seemed to make anything any better, our protests were ignored or tear-gassed out of existence. Our political candidates were defeated and replaced with compromised toadies who were married into the fucking Heinz ketchup fortune. We started blaming directors we didn't like. At least directors can be boycotted. Their films can be shat upon on the internet. And if one's smart and clever enough about shitting on a particular director's films, why, one could turn around and find oneself a content creator. Which is like being an auteur-director, except you don't get paid as much. But shout out to all my patrons. I appreciate you. Happy New Year, y'all. Here you go. I found watching Snyder's first film after watching his two most recent ones very instructive. I didn't watch 300 again, mostly because I was afraid I'd agree with the still fringe but rising interpretation of that film that it's actually the Starship Troopers of 2006. A satire of the very fascist propaganda it was mistaken for by some in its initial run. If I do that, then I run the risk of alienating some of my oldest internet friends. But I did watch Legend of the Guardians for the first time, and let me tell y'all, none of you get to call Zack Snyder a fascist ever again. Regardless of whatever intent was behind 300, dude made a whole ass movie about how to escape from and raise an army against literal, albeit owl, fascism. There's a whole bit in there about how weird it is to actually meet your heroes and find out that they're mortal beings just like you. And about how actual heroism, or at least the flashy big ticket shit that we generally confuse with heroism, will, if you survive, make you wind up looking like this dude. And I think this perspective on heroism informs all of Snyder's actual superhero films way more than any of the antisocial philosophies people are afraid of. But because it's based on a book only millennials with kids have even heard about, nobody saw it or talks about it anymore. Not even the most dedicated haters in Snyder's anti-fandom. Some call Snyder an objectivist because he's repeatedly expressed interest in making, or remaking, technically, an adaptation of Ayn Rand's novel The Fountainhead. And years of dealing with malfunctioning Randroids on the internet have convinced many of my fellow critics that expressing any interest in Rand's work at all is permission to write a person off entirely. To me, Snyder's always come off as just yet another rich Hollywood lib who just wants the news to be boring again. Even before he endorsed Joe Biden in 2020. Maybe he took a stab at the essay contest that Rand's Institute issues to every high school in America still to this day. Like, where do you think teenage Randroids come from? The sky? Nobody's getting through these stupid books unless there's like a big chunk of money at the end of it. That's the real objectivist philosophy right there. Like, somebody should write a book about that. And gee, I wonder why a guy whose dad wanted him to be an architect and whose films are regularly edited into incoherence by the studios he works for would have any interest in a story about an architect who blows up a building rather than change it. The mind boggles. Truly, a mystery for the ages. No, he must be a super secret double agent stealth propagandist. Yes, that's the most likely explanation. Occam's razor is totally with you on that one, guys. Not that I care overmuch about Snyder's personal politics, because I could just as easily say Zack Snyder is Antifa, and has been since before it was cool. To the extent that it's ever been cool, of course. But follow me down this rabbit hole. I have the Owl movie right up top as my big fat Exhibit A. Actually, it's only 90 minutes long, so you people who complain about how long movies should be, you got no excuse. Like, go watch the Owl movie. It's great. It's definitely one of his. From the opening frame. Even if I didn't know, I'd be like, yep, that's one of his, alright. Man's at least got his own distinct style. And in this era of corporate monopolization, boss, that's gotta be tough enough. Watchmen, changes to the ending aside, is still Watchmen, which means it's the purest form of Frederick Wortham's old argument that superheroes are inherently fascist, and that their presence will inevitably lead to mass casualty events. And that's not my reading of it, that's Alan Moore's. So, you want to yell at somebody for dissing Watchmen, go yell at him. He's got nothing but diss tracks these days. Sucker Punch is, if nothing else, fiercely anti-authoritarian, and its villains all represent some aspect or another of fascism's biological dad, nostalgic capitalist patriarchy. I've called Michael Shannon's General Zod a space Nazi since the first time I saw him. What with his eugenics fetish and need to argue the merits of genocide, even with ghosts. Lex Luthor represents the triumph of corporate power over nominally democratic institutions, to the point where he straight up bombs Congress, and would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for these meddling kids, by which I mean Lois and Clark. But mostly Lois, frankly. And the forces of apocalypse are, by design, literal incarnations of fascism, conceived 20 years before Umberto Eco wrote that essay. That's not why they call Jack Kirby the King, though it should be. He tried to warn us. Not his fault we didn't listen. Just like it's not Zack Snyder's fault that Superman can't be your cool dad. And look, I get it. As one of my contemporaries who hates these films with as much passion as I love them once said, the real world sucks. Nobody can fly, and all the dinosaurs are dead. And if you're my age or older, you grew up in a world that had only 4 Superman films, only 2 of which were even close to what we might call good. Both of those were still the compromised products of a industrialized Hollywood system that was as scared of its own shadow back in 1980 as it is today. If not even more so. They took Superman 2 away from Richard Donner more than halfway through production. And for almost a quarter century, we heard rumors about the film we were supposed to see. We saw something like that in 2006, but only as the straight-to-video tie-in to the 5th and, quite frankly, worst Superman film, still, to date. You know, gotta add that little caveat there. Maybe you're in the future. And if so, you know, hey, congratulations on existing. So when hashtag release the Snyder Cut first started trending on Twitter, I must confess, I ignored it, thinking we were in for, at best, another 25-year wait. I figured the rising oceans and raging forest fires we get out here would swallow me and mine long before I'd ever have to talk about Justice League again. But then I saw every movie pundit I follow, some of whom I otherwise respect, joined together to rain on a parade that I wasn't even a part of at the time. And whenever we all get together and speak with one voice about anything, my spider sense starts tingling. Like, actually, not tingling, no, it starts going crazy. The Snyder Cut doesn't exist, they said. And even if it did, it's just a rough cut on someone's hard drive. To get what you want, they said, the WB would have to shell out a bunch of money to finish the special effects, and the sound, and the music. And why would they do that for a movie that sucked and failed at the box office in the first place? And even if they did all that, they said, it would still suck, because everything Zack Snyder does sucks, just like you suck for liking it. And even if you don't personally suck, they said, or at least the more personable among them hastened to add, all of your compatriots are edgelord white bros with bad politics and worse taste in movies, which I can totally tell from this assemblage of screenshots of random tweets. And if that's not enough, here's a playlist of YouTube videos where I break down, in exhaustive and exhausting detail, how Zack Snyder's actually a crypto-fascist, and compare all of his fans to Gamergaters. Even though I'm the one making hundreds of hours of YouTube videos about how a celebrity I've never met is actually the secret source of everything that is bad and wrong with the world. And I must admit, a part of me believed them. The guy who started the original Change.org petition to #release the Snyder Cut was a shithead with internet brain poisoning who wasted zero time blaming all the problems with the theatrical cut, and with modern Hollywood in general, on the phantoms in his head that he called SJWs. By which he probably meant people like Joss Whedon. So he too was projecting from a place of total ignorance, just like the rest of us. Fact is, all this is a symptom of a much wider problem in these United States. We've had nothing really material to argue about here in America for going on the last 40 years. That's when both our major political parties started openly conspiring to take both economic and war-related questions completely off the table, in favor of letting our national god, the so-called free, so-called market, do whatever it wants, including colonize our minds to the point where we start spouting off about the free marketplace of ideas, as if that's not just another phantom in people's heads. So our politics is basically just pro-wrestling without the cage fights, and we are all pro-wrestling fans having glorified forum arguments. And this is just the way things are now. You and me, trapped in this moment endlessly. It's why none of these debates ever actually end. They can't end. If they did, well, we might start fighting about things that actually matter. It's no wonder so many of us have turned into fair-weather Frederick Worthams, hoping that popular art will save us by delivering the correct moral message to children. And by children, we usually mean adults who have different opinions about art than we do. This will, the fair-weather Worthams believe, somehow magically turn us all into better people, even though that's the exact opposite of how art works. All that said, anyone who sent any mean tweets to Patty Jenkins, Kathy Yan, James Wan, or either of my fellow Davids, Ayer and Sandberg, can fuck right off. Because if there's anything we Snyder fans should know by now, it's the pressure directors are under inside the modern film industry. Owned as it is by massive, ruthless infotainment monopolies that do not give a fuck about us, or anything that we like. There's actually a perfect metaphor for this in Justice League 2021. When Iris West goes to start her car, she says, "Come on, we're supposed to be friends now." But even if you've done everything right your whole damn life, by, say, becoming a visionary director with a producer wife who will still fight the studio by your side even after all the L's you two have taken over the years, sometimes the car still won't start. We're supposed to be friends now, but the machine's not even reliable, let alone capable of a human emotion like friendship. Or, actually, apologies to Ramachandra, I should say, not capable of forging the connection a word like friendship implies. It may look like a classic olds on the outside, all shiny and polished, like it just rolled off a studio backlot. But under the hood, the belts are all slipping, the transmission's about to fall out, and all of the hoses have been chewed on by rats named Joss, or Jeff, or Walter, or Kevin, some of whom are still nesting in the oil pan. Given all that, it's amazing any good movies ever get made at all. The way I see it, our corporate overlords would be perfectly happy if every movie turned out like Joss Whedon's Justice League. Part 2. Wait, I said I wasn't going to do the voice. Part 2. Age of Dumbasses. By which I very much include myself. By the time I hit upload on any given video, I never want to see it again. But I cringed my way through the 2017 Justice League review, and I gotta say, to all of you, I'm sorry. Turns out the one thing I pegged as an obvious Zack Snyder thing, the opening credits sequence, was in fact the most Joss Whedon thing in the picture. Joss Whedon doing his impression of Zack Snyder, so he could get all of his, by this point, typical passive-aggressive digs in. The homeless guy with the "I tried" sign, that's Zack Snyder, as imagined by Joss Whedon. I really do have to hand it to you, Joss. You fucking asshole. You got me. But then again, you got us all for 20 years, didn't you? Being Mr. Feminism in public while cheating on your wife and being, quite frankly, the worst kind of boss. A passive-aggressive asshole who loves to start drama. This, at least, according to every single one of his female co-workers. And some of the male ones who haven't gone completely mad. I always knew something happened to Charisma Carpenter in the 3rd and 4th season of Angel, and now, thanks to her courageous testimony, I know that something was you, Joss. I don't know what you did to Michelle Trachtenberg, and frankly, I don't want to know, because what I do know is that afterwards you weren't allowed to be alone in a room with her, and that's enough. I don't even want to know what happened on the set of Firefly, or Dollhouse, Jesus Christ. I do know that Joss Whedon was already rewriting Justice League behind the scenes with my old nemesis, producer Jeff Johns, even before Snyder stepped away to deal with his family tragedy. I know Whedon was hired by a WB that was trying so hard to be Marvel Studios at the time that it missed the opportunity to beat them to several punches and wound up looking like their pale imitator anyway. My basically subconscious awareness of this led to plenty of friendly fire, and for that I'm sorry. I don't mean no disrespect, as they say in other totally legitimate business operations. I was trying to be fair to a film that I didn't even like, in the hopes of not alienating anyone who might have liked it. I was trying to be liked, which in and of itself is a good way to drive yourself mad. Never mind that I was already mad in 2018 when I wrote that review, or that every time I got close to hitting record on that review, some new revelation about some behind-the-scenes madness, all of it post-Snyder's departure, would drop like a stone into the pond of the internet. Fact is, I wound up liking a disturbing amount of what I now know to be Whedon's and Johns' lines. And why is that? I've come to the conclusion that it is because they were scientifically crafted for me to like, by two people who made whole careers out of leveraging their esoteric fan knowledge in such a way as to short-circuit the critical parts of the fanboy brain. This is generally called fan service, and the power of fan service gained easy empathy from me for what I even knew at the time was a compromised production. And by at the time, I mean in November 2017, as I sat there in the theater next to a couple where the guy insisted on explaining every single thing to his spouse, wife, girlfriend, whatever, as it was happening on screen. Just one of the worst theatrical experiences of my entire life, I swear. What fascinates me now that I've seen the Justice League movie I was supposed to see 5 years ago is how much of that movie Johns and Whedon threw in the trash in order to make room for their own brand of fan service. And how so much of what they threw in the trash made their fan service redundant. I liked the save one person bit because I like seeing Batman mentor the next generation of super people. I never imagined a missing scene would render that completely unnecessary, or that such a scene would be Barry Allen and Iris West's first meet cute, or that it'd be so damn beautiful it'd have me ugly crying. No, you're ugly crying at Iris West and Barry Allen's first meet cute. As a fan, this is what it feels like to be actually serviced. And this pattern repeats itself throughout, invalidating nearly all of the limp-ass praises that I managed to wrench out of myself for theatrical cut Justice League. There was no need for a scene where our newly formed league immediately split into two sub-teams over Superman's resurrection. No need for Batman to resolve that conflict by being an asshole to Wonder Woman. There was no need for Aquaman to confess his inner turmoil by doing baby's first Wonder Woman prop gag. There was no need for Alfred to dramatically state, "This is the team," in the third act, because by then we would have already seen a whole-ass movie of them demonstrably being a team. Instead of a whole movie where they pointlessly snipe at each other, like a pack of Avengers. And that's when it hit me, like a Gotham University quarterback on a 30-yard drive. That thing we saw in 2017 was an Avengers movie in disguise. Third time's the charm, I guess. Right, Joss? I should have known that the moment I showed it to one of my IRL Marvel fan friends. And really, she's an X-Men fan, so weapons down, folks. At this point, she's in an even worse place than we DC diehards. I mean, come on. Like, did you see New Mutants? No, you didn't. Stop lying. No need to lie to make friends. Come on. The credits rolled. She shrugged and said, quote, "Well, at least that was a better multi-character piece than the Avengers movies." Unquote. Having been denied a third go-round by his former employers, it seems Whedon finally ironed out the kinks in his own process by burning holes in somebody else's. But we don't have to talk about Marvel. Except to reiterate the one sad fact that I got right all those years ago. For all its length and breadth, this is still a film about a team of loner superheroes who have to put aside their differences and work together to stop an alien invasion. Just like the first Avengers movie. It's also the same plot as 2013's straight to the Walmart electronics section animated film Justice League War, an adaptation of the 2011 reboot of the Justice League comic book, written by one Jeff Johns, which was itself a riff on the two-part finale of the 2005 Cartoon Network animated series Justice League Unlimited, which was itself an adaptation of the first big dumb crossover event of the late 80s post-crisis DC universe, Legends, which saw the formation of the then modern Justice League. And on and on and on it goes, all the way back into the past, when Warner Brothers was owned by actual Warner Brothers. But none of that history matters to a film culture that is indistinguishable from the broader consumer culture. Less concerned with analyzing a film than with proving the viewer/critic/analyst to be more enlightened than the film we're watching. We like to believe that we're so enlightened, so much better than the movies we watch, so much smarter. Because after all, the customer's always right. Right? until two customers disagree, in which case the customer who aligns more closely with what the corporate owners want turns out to be right. And we all pass around screenshots of Rotten Tomatoes scores, as if that proves anything at all, except our own titanic ignorance and lack of imaginations. Until the plans of our corporate overlords change. And then suddenly, up can become down, the skies can fall, and dreams actually can come true. And so it was, on the second anniversary of Joss Whedon's Justice League's release, November 2019, that hashtag Release the Snyder Cut began trending again. Only to be joined this time by actors Ray Fisher, Gal Gadot, and Ben Affleck. Jason Momoa, bless his heart, had been on that train since day one. No disrespect to anyone else for keeping silent to further their careers. God knows. In this economy, yeah, y'all get that bag. Snyder now says that this was when the WB finally started calling him again. They wanted to release the rough cut that he did indeed have on a hard drive at his home at the time. He told them hell no. And the WB took a few months to figure out that they were dealing with one of the rarest creatures in all of Hollywood. A person who still had a few ounces of self-respect. And finally greenlit the project in February 2020. Just in time for a global pandemic. Great jobs all around, WB, as usual. Snyder made it official on May 20th. And spent the next 9 months prying anywhere from $30 to $70 million extra dollars out of the WB's bloody hands. There was some small amount of debate about this. Actually, it's about the ethics of releasing the Snyder Cut. But few took the bait, and most of them shut up after Snyder declared that he'd be taking no money for himself, preparing to spread the wealth around to all the special effects artists and musicians who were now forced to work from home. Critical support, then, for Comrade Snyder, having done more to redistribute wealth in this country than all the politicians and Twitter communists combined. Were I party chairman, I would present both he and his producer wife Deborah with Hero of Socialist Labor medals, and then get them pleasantly drunk. Preferably while watching Justice League. Part 3. Beloved Heroes. Beloved Heroic Ideals. Well, really just the one, but it's the one I mentioned in Part 1, so now we're bringing it back, because that's how this works. For those of us who are already picking up what he was putting down, this is the platonic ideal of a Zack Snyder Justice League film. Exactly what I expected to see after watching Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, which I hear tell is now the only edition available on the WB's bespoke streaming service, as God intended it from the beginning. So, great. 6 years late, but better late than never. I take it as a sign that our cause is a righteous one. Whedon and Johns et al.'s Justice League felt like it was on fast forward, even at normal speed. But here, there's so much room for everything to breathe that it feels like a weight has been lifted off this film's chest. Hell, it felt like a weight was being lifted off of my chest the first time I saw it. It's the difference between watching the 4 Evangelion rebuild films and watching all 26 episodes of the original series. Or to use a non-anime example, it's the difference between watching a whole film and watching its action scenes on YouTube. All of the action scenes from 2017 are still there, of course. They cost too much not to be. Along with a few that weren't, probably because they cost too much to finish. But with all the character development put back in between them, turns out these action scenes, gasp, shock, actually mean something. Remarkable, right? Has it been long for you too? It's like remembering a dream as you watch it come true. Yes, this is still a team of loner superheroes who have to put aside their differences and learn to work together to stop an alien invasion. But thanks to Snyder's humanistic approach to them, their differences wind up mattering a hell of a lot less than their similarities. All of them are loners to one degree or another because all of them are suffering from the trauma of some kind of family separation. Barry Allen, like his TV counterpart, is a Jeff Johns-penned version of himself. So he's driven by a dead mom and a father unjustly accused of her murder, as is by now usual. Aquaman can walk in both worlds, and yet, owing to his mother's apparent death, feels at home in neither, unassuaged even by the emotional appeals of Willem Dafoe. And how, in God's holy name, do you have Willem Dafoe dressed in full Atlantean armor and then just cut him out of your movie? Madness. Criminal negligence is what that is, actually. I'm sure I can find one lawyer in LA who's willing to make that case. Wonder Woman is, just now, in this continuity, 100 years after her first film's conclusion, or 40 years after her second film's conclusion, if you really want to count that, stepping back into the light, even if it is just the grey light of London, and only just now contemplating a return to the amber light of Paradise Island. Cyborg is so much of a show stealer that I'm gonna give him his own section later on. And Batman, of course, went through a whole ass character arc about this in the last movie. Much as people like to pretend they didn't see it, in favor of just making the same joke for 5 years. And counting. Batman's placed in a bit of a unique position in this film. You know, for him, on film. The unifying force of hopeful, guileless optimism in the face of a fallen world, full of mistrustful individuals, isolationist civilizations, and small groups of reactionary terrorists led by Game of Thrones actors. Alfred even gets to underline how ironic all this is after Aquaman refuses the call to adventure in Act 1. No, a man who brooded in a cave for 20 years is not the best recruiter in the world. But, once again, this is movie Batman, and movie Batman has been alone for far too long. He knows this now because Superman taught it to him. First by living an actual life, and then by dying to protect it. At long last, we see here a Batman as team leader. A Batman with a plan that does not rely on gadgets, and who would only be mistaken for a fascist by the most reactionary of fools. A Batman who claims to be operating entirely on faith, which is, as much as the world's greatest detective archetype leans heavily into rationality, a very Batman thing to do. After all, at one point, he demonstrably took a leap of faith that dressing up like a bat and punching mobsters would actually make the world a better place. Everyone has to take a comparable leap at some point. Aquaman initially refuses the call to adventure, both because Zack Snyder's the last person in the world who seems to take all of this Joseph Campbell-inspired screenwriting advice seriously, and because Arthur has no faith in anything, least of all, other people. Other people have faith in him, as illustrated by those Icelanders who sing him a lullaby when he departs their island, and by Mira, who finally finds the right buttons to push by charging him with what would have been his mother's duty. Even then, Arthur retains his initial distrust of Cyborg from the theatrical cut. But here, hearing Vic's origin story is all it takes to shut him right the fuck up. When we finally come back out of Victor's flashback, Arthur has this, oh fuck, sorry bro, look on his face. Which is the closest thing that some guys get to an apology. And while Diana and Arthur still form Team Noble Scion, they don't do it over their opposition to Superman's resurrection. They do it after they have a conversation. Like, you know, normal people who just met. Granted, normal people who were the daughter of the Queen of the Amazons and the son of the Queen of Atlantis, but still. And of course, Flash has to take a leap of faith in himself, but we'll get to that later. All of these leaps are, of course, echoes of the leap Clark Kent took back in Man of Steel. That humanity would, if not outright accept him, at least stop shooting him in the face long enough for him to deal with the whole space Nazi problem. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard didn't actually say leap of faith. He said qualitative leap, but everybody gives him the credit for this anyway. He was talking about believing in God despite the evidence of reason. The leap of faith in Man of Steel, and BVS, and here, was that, despite all evidence to the contrary, humanity would actually make the correct decisions about its own future that would ensure our collective survival. And even if they don't, we still gotta save them, because guess what? The alternative is space Nazis. Sorry, wish I had better news, but I'm sure Zack Snyder does too. This is the vision of heroism this superhero universe articulates. Far from being an escapist power fantasy, the heroism of this Snyderverse, as we've come to call it, some issues with that, but whatever. I don't get to decide these things, much as I wish I did. Heroism in this Snyderverse actually sucks. It's a heroism for people suffering from doubt and existential dread. Ironically enough, it's almost exactly the kind of heroism that Marvel Comics made its name articulating back in the 1960s. And that Marvel movies sorta, kinda, at first gestured at articulating before they all became comedies with action scenes every 15 minutes. There are those who still believe this Justice League is an unsalvageable rush job, made by a hack on the orders of a trend-jumping studio. To which I say, no, that's called Captain America Civil War, because 2016 never ended for me either. We are still there, having the same arguments, with the same people, who either pillory DC for copying Marvel, or insist they should have copied Marvel even harder. I know now, from all that I've learned post-release, that Snyder really was ordered from on high to fast-track this Justice League, instead of making whatever Man of Steel 2 might have been called. Man of Tomorrow, Last Son of Krypton, whatever, take your pick, there's a bunch of them. And as sad as I am to live in a world with only 3 Henry Cavill Superman films, one of which only exists because HBO wanted a big-ticket seller to help roll out their Netflix clone, I am way more pleased with it than I was back in 2012, when the first Avengers movie blew everything before it out of the water, except Iron Man 1 and Ang Lee's Hulk, which I know doesn't even count, but honestly, the Hulk is mired in so many rights issues that I'm using my headcanon until they untangle him from all that and do something else. 9 hours into the MCU, we were still in 1944, and Captain America was just suiting up for his first real mission. 9 hours into this DCU, the Justice League is formed. They've fought off their first apocalyptic invasion. 3 out of 6 of them are ready for solo projects, and the other 3 are in perfect place for sequels. And lurking behind all of it, you could always have the continuing threat of the Great Darkness. Well, that was nice, wasn't it? End of Part 1. To continue, please insert the disc labeled, and you thought it was safe, reviews, Justice League, open bracket, 2021, close bracket, Part 2. And I'll see you back there for that. After, of course, shouting out to my patrons, without whom none of this would be possible. Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The Aftermovie Diner, and Stu G. If you'd like to get your name up here in lights, or in default Arial font, then consider supporting the show on Patreon. But even if you only liked this a little bit, though not enough to give me money, then please, like and subscribe. And I'll see you back here for Part 2. Well, Disc 2. Technically Parts 3 through 6. With probably a little epilogue at the end. Because like I said, they always end up resembling their subjects.